Good evening, everyone. I'm AnthonyLuscre, Kilo 8 Zulu Tango, and tonight's topic is going to be a combination of portable and field operations plus a little bit on go kits. So we'll be covering a wide variety of field operations tonight, and whether it's for field day, for a de-expedition, or whether it's for that emergency communication situation. We all like to get out in the field, and sometimes we have to do it even when we don't like to. So I'm going to talk a lot about planning tonight, and hopefully we'll have time for questions, and let's jump in. As usual, my presentations have a number of links in them. tiny.cc/portop will get you to this slideshow and all the links that are in there. Links are marked with this little symbol, and they aren't underlined as most hyperlinks are. My contact information is Kilo 8 Zulu Tango at ARRL or K8ZT73@gmail.com, and my website is K8ZT.com. There's a number of different portable operations, and we're going to talk about many different facets of them. Different types of antennas, power supplies, miscellaneous accessories, planning, packing, setup, and operating. Now, there's extremes, everything from taking a radio in your backpack for a little stroll to the park in the afternoon, to going out to a Antarctic ocean island that has had less people on it than have landed on the moon originally, and or going out in the middle of a reef in a rather dangerous ocean right now and having a generator about 2 feet away from you on a wooden platform. Not my idea of fun portable operations, but it's included in the different types of operation we're going to talk about tonight. So these are just some types on the left. Field day, I'm going to call this the blank OTA: parks on the air, islands on the air, summits on the air, etc., etc. Contesting. Often in contesting, people want to go out and activate a special multiplier, whether it be a county, state, grid square, etc. Some of the operators will operate portable at one fixed location once they get there, or other ones will continue to move around during the contest, possibly even operating while they're moving around and activating multiple multipliers. Emergency operations, of course, by its very nature, often brings us out of our shacks and into portable operations. Hunting counties, grid squares, etc. We can do that from our home location, but it takes people going out and activating those. So it's the activating of those is the portable operations. And then, of course, the expeditions, where we actually pick up and haul things to a rare country somewhere in the world. Or it might be something a little more laid back, like a vacation de-expedition, where we're going on vacation to maybe a villa somewhere or an all-inclusive resort, but we're going to operate from that DX location. It's often referred to as vacation style operation. Make sure you take out time to have all your meals and all the enjoyment of being on a vacation, but spend some of your downtime operating DX. Pedestrian mobile, where you actually carry your equipment on you and you operate while you can move around. Now, the simplest form of pedestrian mobile is something that almost every ham has done at one point or another, and that's carrying an HT with them. That would be an example of pedestrian mobile, but also you're going to see some other extremes of pedestrian mobile that we're going to talk about tonight. We can also do it on any of the amateur radio frequencies, whether it's HF, VHF, UHF, microwave, satellites, mobile operation, MCOM operations, tactile operations, video, Wi-Fi, direction finding. These are all things where we can get out of our shack and operate. On VHF and UHF, quite often we use single sideband or CW, but that doesn't mean we can't use FM. And in fact, we do use FM quite often. Propagation modes will vary. On VHF and UH, we're often limited to line of sight, but we can have E-skip that will open up for further distances, especially on 6 meters. And on 2 meters and other bands, we might have triple ducting, something that you guys out on the West Coast get to enjoy a lot more than I do here in Ohio. Now, sometimes the propagation mode isn't as exotic and we're simply using a repeater. That's still a form of portable operation. So if we're out there with our HT, we're very much often depending on a repeater. And the same thing is quite often the case during an emergency situation. Microwaves, single sideband, CW, and Wi-Fi are the possible modes. On HF, single sideband, CW, a lot of digital modes, including things like WinLink, FT8, FT4. Propagation goals will considerably change what we do equipment and antenna wise. If we're interested in just local propagation, we can choose bands with limited distances. 10 meters is a great band to use when the band is not open for short distance communications. 80 meters and 160 can also be very good and prevent the problem that we often incur on 40, where actually 40 becomes much too long to hear the stations that are close to us. If we're looking at further distance, the bands above 20 meters can be very helpful. And if we're looking for a band that's almost always open somewhere to intermediate distances, 40 meters might be our choice of bands. Now, we can also break down these different types of portable operation by the transit that gets you to the point where you're going to operate. So if we're going to go there on foot, if we're going to hike in, or even if it's just the final lug from the parking lot to the operating site, or we're going to actually operate while we're moving, pedestrian mobile, then a premium is often placed on lightweight, small size, and definitely battery power. If we have a cycle, a bicycle, a motorized scooter, motorcycle, etc., we can carry a little bit more equipment, and we might also even have some power with us. With the new e-bikes, we might actually have our power right on the bicycle with us. If we're going in via mobile, whether it's car, truck, bus, etc., we have a couple different things we might want to consider. Do we want to be able to operate while we're in motion and operate that way mobile, or is our mobile operation going to be limited to once we park the vehicle? That allows us to add stationary antennas and increase our antenna capability by using the vehicle to get to the location, using the vehicle to contain the radio and the power supply, but then by putting up external antennas, we get a much higher performance than we do with a simple mobile in motion type of setup. Now, these charts are kind of hard to read. These are going to be for when you go through the slideshow, and you do need to go through the slideshow afterward to really appreciate some of these. So what I've done is I've taken different types of operating categories we've already talked about, and then I've talked about the importance of various things. So for power on a vehicle, we can use the vehicle's power. For operations near the vehicle, we have multiple options. We could use the vehicle power. We might carry a little generator. We might do a number of different things. But when we start talking about hiking in or pedestrian mobile, we're pretty much limiting ourselves to batteries. So you'll notice the big concern of weight for hiking in pedestrian mobile, whereas if we're carrying it in a car, weight is not really that much of a concern. When we're talking about antennas, if it's an antenna that's capable of operating in motion, it's usually quite inefficient. So we might want to run a little more power, or we might want to set up a temporary antenna when we get to our location. If we're also talking about a vehicle, we have a lot of different possibilities. Close to the vehicle, we can carry a mast in the vehicle with us. We could have a tilt up. We could have a lot of different possibilities because we have the way to carry it. But if we're hiking in, again, size and weight become limitations. We're not going to carry a 17-pound mast into the field with us, at least not very far. So quite often I'm using things like a long, lightweight fishing pole as my center support on my antenna with very small wire and very light coax. Coax can be a killer for weight when you're hiking. So eliminating that coax is sometimes connecting directly to the radio might be the way to go. So you can see there's a bunch more things here that you can take a look at, things like deployment time, the ease for a newbie, the physical exertion. So if you're operating and pulling into a parking lot in a car and operating from that car radio, it's going to be minimal physical exertion. Whereas if you're hiking in, it can be quite a bit of physical exertion. If you thought the type in the previous slide was tiny, this is even tinier in this chart. And this chart breaks down some other things too. Here we talk about different types of operation across the top: pedestrian mobile, SOTA, PODO, vacation holiday operation, field day, de-expedition, mobile operation, or a state QSO party rover. And we talk about different ways that you might transport, primary considerations, radio needs, antennas, power sources, miscellaneous accessories, what's involved in packing and carrying the equipment to the site, setup at the site, and then the operations that we would be doing. And the operations we're doing can have a big effect on it. If we're doing a de-expedition, we might want to operate for multiple days. We're doing with big pileups. We might have multiple stations on the air at the same time. We want to have worldwide propagation. So we need a little bit better antennas. We need reliable power sources, and we need more power than if we're doing a single POTA operation that we hike in by foot, where we're going to try and make at least 10 contacts. Here we're talking about 10,000 contacts. Here we might be talking about 10 contacts. Now, in all portable and field operations, there's a conundrum, and I call it the trade-offs, and the trade-offs are very many. If we get a antenna with more gain, unfortunately, it ends up being bigger. And that means we have more weight, we have more size, we have a more difficulty putting it up into the air. If we increase our radio power output, that increases our battery capacity needs, which increases our weight requirements. So you notice if we can keep the power output lower, that decreases our battery capacity needs and it decreases the weight. If we increase the battery power, more weight. If we use a lower gain signal, that we can drop the power, we can have a slightly smaller antenna, but it may require more efficient modes of operation. It may limit us to things like CW, FT8, or FT4. And we can be very successful sometimes with those modes, with situations that would be very difficult to make a contact with single sideband, and especially FM. If we increase the efficiency of the mode, such as FT8 or FT4 or CW, it means we have a less potential audience to contact, because we have to depend on people at the other end being able to work that efficient mode, and there's less people than there are typically available on phone. So our audience goes down. So these are some examples of pedestrian mobile. Here we have a little cart. Here we have a backpack. Here we have a backpack, another little cart here. Here we have a handheld, and this is probably the smallest of the setups here. This is a close-up of that type of situation. This is an Elecraft KX2. He's using a hand mic, but he doesn't even need to use that because there's actually a built-in hand mic on that particular radio. In this case down here, this pedestrian mobile rig could be operated by carrying it like W3FF is doing here, and that's a buddy pole. Or when you get to the point where you want to sit down and operate for a while, you might want to prop it up and have it be there. And then you can take off and continue operating pedestrian mobile. One of the things you're going to notice on almost all these pedestrian mobile setups is that there is a wire trailing off. Whether you see the wire or not, almost all these setups require a counterpoise. Probably the most important thing I'm going to tell you tonight, that counterpoise needs to be able to break free from your radio without A, damaging your radio, B, knocking you over, or C, pulling someone down who gets entangled on it behind you, because someone will step on your counterpoise, someone will drive over your counterpoise. So for example, on the KX2, you simply use a banana plug so it comes apart very easily. You can also use things like alligator clips, magnetic connections, etc. But you want that cable to be able to break off before anything serious happens to you or anyone that might get tangled up in your counterpoise. Also remember to pull in the counterpoise when you're not actually operating. Crossing a road is a good time to pull in the counterpoise. Oh, by the way, the buddy pole is an antenna produced by W3FF, and it's not a real cheap antenna, but they do very well in the field. But W3FF knows that some people don't want to spend that money. So if you go to the buddy pole site, he actually has information there on building your own buddy pole using PVC and some simple wire and extendable whips. And you can build your own buddy pole for under $25. And I've done that. It works just great. And it's great that he gives that information for people that want to build their own. It's not as durable, it's not as nice as the commercial buddy pole, but it'll get you on the air. Now, this is an example of me operating pedestrian mobile. I was going on Amtrak across the country, and I wanted to make sure I worked all the state QSO parties that year. And the California QSO party was going on while I was in transit, and I would not get to California before the party was over. So if I was going to make my minimum of 2 contacts, I needed to get off the train somewhere. The train typically stops for about 5 minutes, so that wasn't long enough, but I knew we'd be stopped for about 10 to 15 minutes in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. So I stepped off by the side of the train, used my KX2, my AX1 antenna, and I was able to make some contacts. Now, unfortunately, these pictures are posed after the contact was made, because you see I don't have my trailing wire there anymore, and I was actually using CW using a key when I did this, but I did make both CW and phone contacts, and I was able to make my contacts. As it turned out, when we got to Sacramento, we were delayed on the platform because someone was ill for about 15 minutes. So I was able to get out my equipment and make a contact from 5 more contacts from inside of Colorado. So I'm sorry, California. So I worked the California QSO both out of state from Colorado and in state from Sacramento. I was using about 5 watts there. This is a video, and there's a number of videos in here that you can watch. I'm not going to run through this now. This guy, VK3, I think, I can't remember his call. The thing I always remember is all of his videos, he's never, ever wearing shoes. So he's the barefoot QRP ham in Australia, but he has some great information on portable antennas. He likes magnetic loops. He likes a variety of antennas. This is not the way you probably want to hold your magnetic loop to operate in the field. Oh, VK3YE. But yes, the barefoot ham. You notice, see, no shoes, no shoes, no shoes. Now, the type of operation you do can change drastically depending on how many people are involved in the project. If it's solo, one person does everything, you can't lift as heavy of objects, you can't have multiple hands in multiple locations at one time. So you have to be careful that what you're planning can be accomplished by one person. If you have 2 people working together, all of a sudden you have a lot more possibilities. Having someone hold that rope while you string up an antenna can be very helpful. Having another person to help you tilt that mast up into position, et cetera, et cetera. Now, when 2 people work together, you can share time on using 1 radio, or you can use 2 radios. It's just as easy for 2 people to set up 2 radios in the field and operate 2 radios, or they might choose to trade off and operate 1. If you get a group of people together, like you might do at field day, a de-expedition, etc., now you have the possibility of having multiple stations working in shifts, and maybe even having some people that don't operate at all, but are simply support crew, providing meals, helping with the setup, etc. The next thing you want to decide on is, when you're planning your operation, what is the pace going to be? In other words, how fast are you going to try and work people, and how many people are you going to try and work? If it's a casual, laid back operation for recreational purposes, you might not care about how many people you work. Maybe you work 1 or 2 people, and that's just fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but you don't want to put 6 hours into preparation to work 2 people, probably. Now, if it's a competitive situation with higher activity, you might want to spend some more effort to be able to get to that point in time. You want to maximize the number of contacts. This might include a mix of both calling CQ and hunting and pouncing. If it's an intense operation, like you're trying to win a contest, you're going to need to be able to run and call CQ. You might want to make sure you can operate full-time in the event. So that means you need enough power resources to be able to do that. And maybe you need to have multiple operators. So again, the intensity of the operation from casual to elite can really determine how you need to plan. Before we do anything in the field, probably the most important slide in the presentation is danger. Watch out for electrical wires above. When you're swinging that antenna around, that mast around, whatever you're swinging around, if you touch an electrical circuit, you could kill yourself. Now, it says watch out for wires, but I'm going to amend that to say watch out for any type of electrical service, whether it's a light pole. Please don't use light poles to put things on, because you don't know if that metal might be shorted out and the wires are exposed to the case. I actually once got shocked by touching a light pole at a basketball court. I was leaning on the light pole and reached out and touched the basketball support. And guess what? I now became the easiest ground for the light pole to get to. It didn't want to use its own wiring. It chose me. Fortunately, it wasn't very severe, but you don't want to take that chance. My rule is 2 times the distance away from whatever I have. If I have a 20-foot antenna, I need to be 40 feet away from the closest electrical source. Now, antennas are a really big part of portable operations, and they're sometimes the most difficult part. So I put together a whole bunch of information, and we actually talked a little bit about this at the field day operation that Marty and I talked about previously. I have a whole sheet here. You can click here or here. The link is tiny.cc/port antenna. And I put this together originally in 2020 for the summer field day, because everyone in our club was for the first time going to be doing field day on their own because of COVID. And everyone said, hey, when I go to field day, someone else puts the antenna up. How am I going to do this at home? So I put together some information on pros and cons of different types of antennas: dipoles resonant, dipole non-resonant, inverted Vs, end-fed, wire loops, all these yellow wire antennas, verticals, beams, magnetic loops, integrated antennas, and mobile antennas, pros and cons of each, and some notes on them. Then I go through and cover each of the topics with articles, videos, and even some commercial antennas for each of these different types. Now, originally, this just started off for field day, but it got bigger after that, and people wanted to do specific things like 10 meters. We also had a 160 activity in our club, and a lot of people didn't have 160 antennas, so they wanted to put up a limited space or portable 160 antenna, magnetic loops, integrated antennas, whether it's a whip, a buddy pole, or a pedestrian mobile type of setup, or simply a rubber duck. Mobile antennas, VHF and UHF antennas, 2 meter, 6 meter, satellite antennas, general antenna resources, and a great chart that's available from the Villages group out in Florida. And it is a guide to the stealthness and efficiency and cost for different types of antennas. They grade them on an A through F scale. And this document is available at their website. Again, tiny.cc/port antenna. Now, let's start with probably what we talked about originally. Let's go out with an HT and operate portable. It's very easy to do. Got an integrated antenna. We're ready to operate. The problem is it's got a lousy integrated antenna. Most rubber ducks are not very good. So we can improve our rubber duck with about 10 cents worth of equipment. One little crimp-on connector and about a 19-inch piece of wire will give us what's called a tiger tail. And adding a tiger tail to your HT can improve its performance greatly by having this other piece of counterpoise, as opposed to just depending on your body as the counterpoise. So 19¼ inches is the suggested length. Anything around 19 inches will work just fine. If you do need to calculate different distances, you can do it. But what you want to do is you're connecting it to the ground portion of your antenna. Another antenna that will just greatly improve your signal would be a roll-up J-pole made out of twin lead. You can also create a flower pot antenna. Flower pot antennas are called that because you can hide the bottom of it in a flower pot, and then it has PVC pipe coming up. And these are great antennas for 10 meters and up. You might also, in some cases, want to add a small RF amp to be able to increase your power. Here's again another picture of a J-pole made with 300 ohm TV ladder line. Very inexpensive, very easy to make. You can hang this in a tree. You can put this in a piece of PVC pipe if you want to have it rigid so you can hold it up above your head. There's a lot of different ways you can do that. Now, Michael KB9 VBR has some very good YouTube videos out there, and he has one on portable antennas. And he talks about this in the video. I'm not going to play the video for you. I'll let you play that later. Now, magnetic loops can be very good portable antennas, but there's a big problem. They have a very narrow bandwidth. Now, if you're going out just to operate an activity like field day, that can be very problematic because you're constantly tuning. But if you're doing an emergency operation where you're going to be on the same frequency, or you're doing something like FT8 or FT4 where you're going to be on the same frequency and not moving around a lot, this can be a great antenna on HF. Very small, portable, easy to put in place, not very obvious to the people walking by. But again, because you're operating on a limited frequency and not QSYing all the time, you're not having to retune it all the time. Once you pick the type of antenna you want, many antennas require a support. You might be able to hang it from a tree branch. By the way, before you hang tree branches in parks, make sure you know what the particular park's rules are. You can get people very angry with you very quickly. But if you are going to hang them from tree branches, in the past, I've used a number of methods, and I'll talk about some a little bit later here for getting the rope to hold the antenna above the branch. But if you don't have trees, you might want to consider mast. Now, there's still mast. There's a variety of them available. The simple stackable type that were available at Radio Shack very inexpensively, the type that rust out if you leave them laying on the ground all the time, so don't do that. But there's also ones that collapse into themselves. Now, this is a great mast. These work very well. You tighten each of these little clamps as you push it up. The problem is they're very, very heavy, so you're probably not going to carry one of these out in the field. Now, when I mean very, very heavy, that doesn't mean two people would have any problem moving it around, but you're not going to carry it on a backpack. This is a painter's pole. I've used this with my buddy pole, works very well. It's about 6 foot long. It extends up to about 16 feet. Extendable fiberglass poles, painter poles, fishing poles work out very well. And if you're using self-supporting antennas such as verticals or handheld antennas, you don't need to worry about these supports. Now, a lot of people use fiberglass or aluminum military surplus poles, and I'm not going to call them mast because they're not really masts. They're really designed as camo support poles. They're designed to hold up lightweight camouflage over a different area or screening for shade. So they're not really designed for what we use them for as amateurs, but you can get by using them, and I'll talk a little bit about them. The specs for the aluminum is each tube is 48 inches long. Same thing with the fiberglass. The aluminums weigh about 2.7 pounds. Outside diameter is 1.785, inside diameter is 1.57. The wall's about 0.11 inches, and the last 3.5 inches is the smaller diameter that allows you to insert it into the next piece. Now, what's the pros and cons of aluminum versus fiberglass? Aluminum is usually more expensive. It might be stronger, but I don't know that for sure, but it definitely has less bending and flexing than the fiberglass does if you're going to tilt it up. It's easier to damage, though. If you ding it in any way, you'll never get them to go back in again. The fiberglass tends to chip or break as opposed to getting bent. The metal tends to get bent in such a case that you can't insert it back into the hole again. There is more danger for electrical shock when using these versus the fiberglass, but still don't even take the fiberglass close, because I know what you're using the fiberglass for. You're putting a metal wire up in there with it. So don't think that you're safe because you're using fiberglass. For both reducing shock risk and antenna interaction, I suggest if you use metal ones, finish off the last 4 feet with one fiberglass one. Fiberglass or carbon fiber telescopic crappie fishing poles, 7.2 meters over 20 foot, but the tip is pretty useless. It's very tiny. $12 to $39. I love these. Now, when you look at these on eBay, you're going to see some advertises fiberglass, some advertises carbon fiber. And you think, well, if I'm going to hang a wire next to it, there's going to be interference with carbon fiber, but not with fiberglass. Well, the problem is I can't guarantee what it's actually made out of, and I don't believe anything they say. And really, most of the time I'm using it as an inverted V, so there's not really that much wire to support close structure with it. So I've used both advertised types without any noticeable difference. These are great push-up masks, but they're rather expensive. These have clips that go on them, and you slide them up. Now, if you want to be able to tilt a mast up in position, a car-mounted tilt like this is good. I've also seen the type where instead of tilting up, they swivel to the left or right. They're actually easier to build that way than they are in this tilt up situation, but they work very similarly. Just remember, when you're swinging up that fiberglass mast, though, if you have too much weight on the top of it, it's going to bow really bad, because those are designed for vertical support, not for lateral support. You can also use a drive-on structure. Here's a structure with from Bob down in Florida, using Knight's eyes, tighten up clamps that are available on Amazon. Here's the links for them. Oh, before I get to that, let me just show you what I used this year. Hopefully I can find this quick. Let me see if I can. I'm not going to try and find my example of it, but Harbor Freight this last month had flagpoles on sale. I'm not sure if it's still on sale or not, but we'll see here. It is an extendable telescoping flagpole, includes a flag with it. Actually, I got mine for $54, but what it does is that you push it up and twist it. The nice thing is if you go up to the top of this, let me see if I can zoom in even a little bit more. Let me get the zoom feature on my computer here. Wow, too much zoom. Okay, so the nice thing is you can take this top ball, it unscrews from the top. Once you unscrew that, there's a piece of plastic inserted in there. You can take 2 screws out on the sides of it, and that plastic insert comes out. And guess what fits in there perfectly? One of those fiberglass mast pipes inserted upside down with the small side going in there fits perfectly. So you'll have 24 feet, and the top of it will be fiberglass instead of aluminum. You do need to support this in some way. This is designed to dig a hole in the ground and put a piece of PVC pipe in. By the way, it comes with the American flag. It doesn't come with the POW flag, but it does come with the American flag. But I actually lashed it to a pole that was behind the cabin we were at. And if I get a chance, maybe I'll try and find that picture. But right now, I'm not going to go searching for it. So if you're putting antennas in the trees, you can use a number of different things. You can use a throwable weighted rope. You can use a bow and arrow. You can use a fishing pole. You can use a slingshot. You can use an air gun with compressed air. You can use a drone with an automatic release, a balloon, or a kite. The problem I found is it's often quite difficult for me to throw things up in the air. And what I found this last year is we had pine in the area where I was at the cabin, and there was a lot of knobs just sticking out, branches that were broken off. So instead of trying to throw something up, I used my 31-foot antenna before I assembled my vertical, and I simply taped a little piece of rope on that, brought it up and swung it into position and flipped it over the branch with my 31-foot fiberglass mast instead of having to throw it up into the air repeatedly. But this is a great information on using throw lines, and actually the throw line rope works much better than the other one. So take a look at the videos on this and ideas on antennas and antenna structure. So what I'd like to do now is I want to stop and take some questions now while we're done with antennas and done with some of the other things, and then we're going to jump into power and operating and some other things. So I see there was already a thing in the chat, a piece of 4x4 with a pipe flange and a short piece of pipe nested well into the rear bumper of campers, where you usually store the sewer hose. I've used this amount of pole made of fiberglass, 4-inch poles with a pulley at the top. By the way, at home, when I used to live in an apartment, I used to bring out a portable antenna for operating on the satellites. And what I did is I drove a piece of PVC pipe into the ground, and it was always there, so I could go out and just simply drop my mast into it. It was flush with the layer of the ground, so it never bothered when they came to cut the grass. So if you're going to be using the same place over and over again, you can put a recessed area in the ground to put your mast in. So any questions, please go ahead and raise your hand or put it in chat. Any questions on antennas, antenna supporting structures, or anything I've talked about so far?
No, we've got 2 hands up right now.
Okay, go ahead, Gene, first.
Okay, hi, everybody. This is Gene in Killeen, Texas. I have one, actually I have 2 of the trailer hitch mounts, for vertical antenna.
Mm-hmm.
Can you guide a either ground strap or some type of radial wire through the trailer hitch and connect it to the body of the vehicle for a type of ground or point?
Yes,
for radio? I mean, I guess ground would be
yeah,
best.
you can, but what you're probably better off doing is you're probably better off laying down a radial field if you're going to be using a vertical antenna. The car would be helpful, but if because you're not driving, you can lay out 20 or 30-foot wires, put 4 or 5 wires out, and you would have much better ground plane than just using the body of the car.
Where would the connection points be for
again, that's only a vertical that would be active. So let's say I put my Eagle 1 antenna. That's a fiberglass pole with a wire that runs up the center. Out
Right.
of it comes two wires at the bottom. One wire is the wire that's connected to the ground plane, and the other one connects to the antenna tuner. So it depends on the antenna. Most verticals will have a ground side to them on the feed line, and that's what you would hook up to the radio field.
Okay, I got you. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. Tom, go ahead.
Hi, couple of things. Stealth antennas, there's a caution I like to share with people as often as it's practical. Any antenna with a gauge of less than 14 American wire gauge is unlawful in the vast majority of the United States for a permanent antenna. People keep using piano wire and all this stuff to hide it from their neighbors. But if your antenna falls and your neighbor's dog gets an RF burn on their nose, you're never going to hear the end of it. You're likely to end up in court. So be aware that anything less than 14 gauge for a permanent antenna is unlawful. It's forbidden by the National Electric Code. And the other thing, if you're considering using an antenna inside a PVC pipe, a good trick is to cut off a little portion of that pipe, put it in your microwave for 10, 20 seconds. When you open it, use the back of your hand in case it's when it gets really hot. Test and see if it's warmed up. If it has warmed up, it is radio obscuring. If it hasn't warmed up, it's radio transparent. And that means it's a good thing to put an antenna in. But if it warms up sharply, you can't put an antenna inside it successfully.
But before you do that, make sure you also put a small glass cup of water in there, because if it is not, you will damage your microwave. So don't try that trick unless you also put a safety in your microwave, by the way. I've heard that trick.
True statement.
Yes, I've heard. And by the way, if everyone could turn on their pictures, I'd love to see your smiling faces. That's great feedback for. So don't mute your pictures, just mute your microphone.
Well, unfortunately, I've got a bandwidth problem.
That's okay.
The other thing about the PVC pipe is don't leave PVC pipe in the ground without some sort of plug in it, because you'll have the unfortunate thing of dropping your nice pole in there and having it jam in there on you because of mud and silt. Don't ask how I learned that. It's too embarrassing.
Well, let me tell you a trick that I've learned over the years with fiberglass poles, fishing poles, Eagle One antennas. Anytime using anything that has a friction fit or even a twist fit to it, carry a pair of rubber gloves with you, preferably the type that are used for dishwashing. They make a huge difference. Being able to grab that with rubber gloves, it gives you like 3 times the strength to be able to twist it than if you're trying to do it with your bare hands. So in my box with my Eagle One fiberglass antenna, I always make sure I have a pair of gloves with me. Makes a big difference. Even if you just use the simple ones that people use for health purposes, they work even better, but the ones that are designed for dishwashing work the best. Other questions, comments?
Yeah, if you can lay your hands on an AB86 or an AB155 military mass kit, and there's newer versions of them too, but I don't have the numbers in my head. The AB86 is designed to work as both an antenna support and an antenna. And apropos of the ground plane question earlier, the kits, some of them come with the ground plane that you attach to the insulating section, and you extend them out as elevated radios, and man, does it ever boost performance. So, you know, there's some good gimmicks out there if you're patient. A lot of the prices are off the wall, but if you're patient, you shop, you can get some really good equipment.
I also wanted to show you all this. I have one of these. It pens in the ground and it tilts over and it fits into the bottom. These aren't the ones that tilt over, but I have one that you can buy them to be able to go into the ground, insert that mast, and then you can lift it up. The nice thing about that is it'll keep it from scooting away when you're trying to push it up, especially by yourself or with only 2 people. It'll keep it mounted on the ground, and it makes a big difference. It doesn't help with the support of the antenna, but it makes it gives you a pivot point to work against when you're raising it. Okay, if there's no other questions, we'll come back to questions later, but I'm going to go ahead and jump into the next part of our presentation, and that is talking about power. We need electrical power to operate the radio. Now, sometimes the radio has the battery in it, and we don't have to worry about bringing extra power with us. We just have to worry about not using that power up. Now, some of the radios that have batteries on them allow you to change the battery in the field. So a spare battery can be invaluable. Having spare HT battery, most HTs let you easily change the battery. You can also have a battery case that'll let you put in standard cells into that in case you run out or you don't have a charger to be able to use. Some of the radios, like this X6100, have the battery inside. You can't replace it in the field. The ICOM 705 uses a clip-on battery on the back that's similar to some of the HT batteries. So there's different battery configurations. As far as base radios go, mainly QRP radios have internal battery options. There was an optional battery for the Yaesu 897. You could actually have a battery in the base of that. 2 batteries, as a matter of fact, but they didn't give you a long period of time, and they were very complicated, expensive, and required a special set of chargers. So they weren't that great, but there are some radios. But most of the time when using a full powered HF radio, 100 watts or more, you're going to need an external battery source, whether it's a battery in a vehicle, whether it's a generator, whether it's whatever you want to do. So these are radios with integrated batteries, but most of the other radios will not have integrated batteries. Here's a little chart talking about internal batteries, radios that do have internal battery capabilities. Now, if you're really concerned about weight and size, there's some extremely compact, low power HF radios under 5 watts. These are all CW only radios, although the new radio from QRP Labs is the QMX. It has both single sideband and CW, and something like the little True SDX has single sideband capability also, but we're again talking about 5 watts or less for these radios. When we start talking bigger, we're going to need batteries, and we're going to need bigger batteries. Quite often, the most common batteries in use now are lithium iron phosphate batteries. Lithium iron phosphate is probably the preferred method to go. A lead acid battery like this is a lot less expensive, but there's 2 main drawbacks to it. And number 1 is the weight. It weighs considerably more. The second drawback is they don't have as many recharge cycles as the lithium ferric phosphate. Now, if you go to other forms of lithium, they don't have the same characteristics. So if you're looking for a battery, 12 amp hour, 6 amp hour, I'm going to suggest you probably going to want to look at lithium ferric phosphate. Now, one of the problems is when you buy batteries inside of devices like what they call solar generators, which we'll show in a few minutes, they don't often tell you what kind of battery's in there. So it's very important to figure out what kind of battery it is. Just lithium statement itself is not really appropriate. Here's an example of a lead acid battery. These work fine, but they are heavy, and they do have a limited number, less recycles. And also they have a battery, they have a voltage pattern that drops off, and you can't use the full as much percentage of the battery as you can with a lithium ferric phosphate. Now, let's go back even a little bit further. A lot of times people in their HTs had NiCad, nickel cadmium batteries. This was an older technology. They were fairly cheap, but they suffered memory problems. And a lot of people still live in fear of nickel cadmium, and they treat all their batteries like they're nickel cadmium, even though they're not the same type of things. Most lithium batteries on the market don't have the same memory issues that NiCads had. And one of the things, because of the memory problems, was it was very important that you completely depleted the cell down to its suggested rating before you charged it. If you just kept topping it off, that would contribute to the battery going bad faster. But that's not necessarily the case. And I noticed the other day, my daughter is still in that mode. And even though we have a lithium phosphate battery for the lawnmower, she waits to charge it right before she uses it each time, as opposed to charging when she's done, because she's afraid it's going to discharge on its own. Lithium ferric phosphate do not have a real quick discharge rate like some of the older batteries. Nickel metal hydride is what replaced most of the nickel cadmium, but now you're seeing a lot of lithium ion batteries. The batteries in all of our cell phones, laptops, etc., are lithium ion. They are cheaper than lithium phosphate, ferric phosphate, but they also have the possibility of they're not as safe. When you see the people with fires, that's often from lithium ion batteries, quite often cheap ones. They do require special chargers. It's very important if you're using any type of lithium battery that you're using the right charger. And a very common battery, even a lot of batteries you don't realize, they have a bunch of 18650s in them. They're basically a battery that looks similar to a AA battery, but they're not quite the same size. The first 4 digits designate the physical dimensions. The 5th digit indicates the cylinder cell, and the 18650 is 18 millimeters by 65 millimeters long, and it's everywhere. So here's some lithium battery types and the different performance ratios. Again, I'm going to suggest if you're looking for larger batteries for amateur radio use, you're probably going to want lithium iron phosphate batteries to use. Now, when you're buying these lithium batteries, they're often confusing because they will talk about, you'll see something like 1S 2P or 2P or 2S 2P or 4S 1P, and I'll explain what that means. So let's first talk a little bit about serial and parallel connections. If you take two 12-volt batteries and hook them up in this configuration, that will give you a serial connection that will give you 12 volts plus 12 volts equals 24 volts, and you'll have the same amp hours. If you hook them up parallel, you will now have 12 volts instead of 24, but you will have, you'll add up the amp hours, so you'll have 200 amp hours. So if you need 12 volts and you can do this, you're going to get 200 amp hours. If you need 24 volts, you're going to need this configuration and you're going to get 100 amp hours. So this is the deal with those lithium batteries. 2S 2P means that you have 2 cells in series, 2 packs of 2 parallel cells in series for a total of 6.4 volts, 10 amp hours. A 1S 3P would give you 3.2 volts, but 15 amp hours and so forth. Most of the hams use the 4S 2P or the 4S 4P batteries because we usually want around 12 volts. There's a whole bunch of information again from KB9 here on portable power. And there's another video here on choosing battery size from the Smoking Ape. These are what are referred to as solar generators. They're not generators and there's no solar attached to them. The idea is you would connect this to a solar panel, charge it like you would with a generator, and then use the battery in them. They also typically have an inverter so you can get 110 volts AC out of them. They often have 12 volts, 18 volts, 5 volts variety, and they also always have an obvious light that blinds you when you accidentally press that button instead of pressing the power button. This particular model has been discontinued for probably 3 years, but I own one of these and I use it for field day, and I can operate my 5-watt radio, 2 5-watt radios for the entire field day period, 24 hours with no problem, including charging up my computer. One of the things about all these different systems is when you're shopping for these, make sure it actually has a lithium ferric phosphate battery, not a lithium ion battery in it. If it doesn't say it's not lithium ferric phosphate, it's lithium ion because it's so much cheaper. The other thing you have to be very careful is these are often rated on amp hours, but the problem is they usually pick the lowest voltage that it does because that'll give them the highest resulting amp hour rating. So notice this is 12 volts DC for 32 amp hours, but it's also rated 5 volts DC for 77 amp hours. So guess which one they will predominantly highlight in the advertising. These are 2 that I found a couple years ago, and the models change all the time. But again, look for a lithium ferric phosphate one. These are both around $200 and $130. The biggest difference is this cheap one on the top does not have a pure sine wave, so you might run into some problems with the voltage. I'm sorry, the AC inverter on it. And these, again, there's a lot of information on these type of packages. Now, power banks, you can get a small power bank to go with your mobile phone, but you can also get a large power bank. This is about the size of a textbook. This particular one puts out 20 volts, and I use this to power my laptop for the entire field day and don't even use half of it up. And because I'm putting 18 volts out, it came the set of adapters that actually plug directly into the laptop, and it actually charges the laptop and runs the laptop both. Again, beware that if a unit has 12 to 18 volts, they might give it a 5-volt rating to show a better amp hour reading. This particular one has both 9 volts, 12 volts, and 5 volts on off switch, et cetera, et cetera. Now, a couple of years ago, I found out about something new. It's called power delivery. It's abbreviated PD. These are power banks that put out different voltages depending on what you connect them to. And these are designed to fast charge phones and other devices. Typically, the device you're charging has a smart controller in it that tells the PD device how much power to deliver. But amateur radios aren't designed that way. So if we want it to deliver 12 volts, we can buy an adapter cable that plugs into the PD and then gives us the right voltage out. This particular one plugs in and then gives me 12 volts out. And it happens to be the exact size connector that's used for the Elecraft KX2 or KX3. Now, when I first found this, the power device, the PD power bank, was like $45, but the cable was $27. And it turned out, just looking around a little bit, I found this same cable, 2 for $7, just a different model. But again, the first thing I did when I bought this, I took out a silver Sharpie, marked this 12 volt output right on here, because otherwise you don't know what that does. The regulator is in the cable. By the way, that silver Sharpie can be your friend for all types of chargers, power supplies for your laptops, everything. Always label all them so you're not putting in the wrong one. You can either get a silver Sharpie. If you want to get really fancy, they also have gold or bronze color Sharpies, and they work on black. You can buy these at your local Harbor Freight, your local Walmart, etc. They're all designed for jumping cars, and they do work well, because I had some trouble with my car recently where the battery was self-discharging, and I have one of these little Vikings, and it will charge the car as long as it's charged up. If it's not charged up, it won't jump the car. The problem with most of these is they're designed for high instantaneous delivery and not long-term delivery. But I am using my little Viking. It has 12 volt at 6 amps out, and it does work just fine to operate a radio for quite a while. And it's under $70. Portable battery needs, again, the type of battery you're using determines how low you can discharge it. The type of operating you does also makes a big difference. If you're sitting there and hunting and pouncing and receiving a lot and not transmitting much, you're going to get a lot more time. Whereas if you're sitting there calling CQ all the time, you're going to go through your battery a lot faster. There's also something called a buck converter. These are DC to DC power converters, which either step up or step down voltages. They work well, but some of them can be noisy, and some of them also can have some other issues with them. But if you buy it from a reliable manufacturer, these can work very well. Also, having a battery power monitor where you can see the power that's being used can be very helpful. Make sure you're using the right battery charger for the right batteries. If you're planning on using human power, here's a little generator that you can use. If you've never done this before, it takes a tremendous amount of energy on your part to run a radio, and you better have a battery as an intermediate step in there, or every time you take a breath to talk, you're going to stop pedaling enough that you're going to drop down. So batteries still are probably the best way to go. And I'm going to jump through some of this stuff, but I want to just point out real quick here, if you're using 2 amps on transmit versus 20, you can get about 10 times as much time on the radio. Now, the rest of this talks about different accessories that you might want to pack, and I'm going to let you guys go through this on your own. But one of the things I always suggest is don't forget to bring your own table. You can't always depend on tables. They're very small. They're very easy to carry. I have one of these. It's really nice because I can operate it with a regular chair. I can operate it with a beach chair, or I can operate it sitting on the ground because it has 3 different height arrangements. Here's my friend Steve. He went to South Carolina to the beach. He always brings his table with him, and he has his radio, his computer, and his interface all mounted on one of these cooking racks using wire ties. and he can simply pick it up and move it from one place to another. It doesn't really offer much protection, but he puts it inside of a protective case, and he always makes sure he brings his own table. Also, you're going to want to bring all the things you're going to need for your own personal survivor and comfort. Now, I want to finish up tonight with this little portion of the talk. And again, I'm not going to get through this whole thing because it's quite long, but I want to talk about the concept of 2 is 1 and 1 is none. A lot of military and prep sources claim credit for this, and we'll give it to the Navy SEALs because I don't want to argue with the Navy SEALs, but it may not really even be theirs alone. But the whole idea is 2 is 1 and 1 is none. If an item is essential to your portable operation, you need to bring at least 2 with you. So when I'm going across the country, my wife and I are going to operate field day, I always make sure I have 2 radios with me, because if the radio dies, I don't do anything on field day, and I waste it all the time. So it's essential, so I bring a second one. You might want to also consider things like batteries. Instead of having 1 large battery, 2 smaller batteries might be the better way to go if something happens to the battery. 2 antennas, even if one is even a severe compromise, is better than having only 1 antenna. 2 or more short coaxes can easily be connected with viral connectors, as opposed to 1 long one, which you can't use in 2 places. So 2 is 1, 1 is none. Now, there's another way around this too, and I'm going to call it the multi-pronged approach, because sometimes we can get away by not bringing a second one along and still getting the same sort of redundancy. And the way we do that is by having redundant items, redundant capabilities, flexibility, and foolproofing. Let's look at each of these. So consider carrying a redundant capability, not a redundant gear with you. So instead of bringing 2 sets of pliers and side cutters, I bring 1 pliers side cutters with me, and I bring my Swiss Army knife, which also has pliers on it. By the way, if you're getting a Swiss Army knife, always get the one with pliers. I know it's not as much fun as the corkscrew, but it really works much better to get nuts off of cases than a corkscrew does. If you have 2 things that have overlapping functions, then you have 2 of them, and they actually perform different needs. See the MacGyver presentation from RATPAC from 2 years ago on April 1st, where we talk about a lot of the things you can do when you don't think you can, including using a standard orange extension cord as coax without damaging it all. Another thing is flexibility in operating can provide a backup if 1 mode or band is not effective. The more modes you can operate means if you're having trouble with one, that you can switch to another one. So let's say you're having trouble with your microphone. If you could switch to CW or digital, you'd still be able to make contacts. But if you don't have the capability, then you're stuck with single sideband and no working microphone. So again, you'd have to have a backup microphone to make sure that you didn't run into that problem. Being able to switch bands can be especially important. I hear a lot of people say, I'm going to go out and operate portable and I'm only going to work 1 band. What happens if the propagation gods don't favor that 1 band, and then you're stuck? So being able to do more than 1 is always helpful. Foolproofing things is also a great way to avoid failure. Minimize field assembly of station components. The more things I can put together ahead of time, especially with things with small components, the less likely I am to misassemble it or lose a component in the field. Pre-measure and clearly mark items, lengths, and settings. Again, that Sharpie can be your friend. Consider brightly colored or painted items to avoid loss in the field. Have both paper and electronic versions of all manuals with you, and keep it simple, stupid. So those are some of the things that'll help you. And then I have a whole bunch more, and I'm not going to go through all the rest of these slides, but everything from go boxes. I'm going to stop a quick one here. This case is a wonderful case to have, but guess what happens when someone sees this in the airport? They think something is expensive in it. Now take this old beat up suitcase, and in my case, I have a bright purple one that I got at a garage sale for $5. I carry the same equipment in there as I wouldn't here, because I actually have inside of here a couple of these safety boxes, but no one sees them, and it's not as attractive nuisance at an airport as this. I know this has big money items in it. I think this has someone's underwear in it. So again, go to the local garage sale. This has wheels on it too, by the way. Might also sometimes think about a little stand to carry things, a wagon. I convinced my wife to get this wagon because I told her we're going to take it to Blossom, which is our music venue here. We do actually use it at Blossom also, but it's also portable. So I'm just going to run through these and just show you some things real quick. So you can go through all these slides, and for more information on a bunch of things. I just want to show you real quick one other thing here. The whole idea of when you're making go boxes, really 3 different categories. Ones that are packed to be able to withstand the gorilla in the airport, but then also the ones that you can just open up and start operating in the field. And that's what I use in a lot of cases. So I have my go box made in a tackle box. Here's an example of one of them that I was operating years ago, but I've actually gotten a little bit smaller, and I actually have this one now. This is my go box in a little Plano tackle box. Flip the front down, open the top, attach the antenna to the side, and I'm ready to operate. Okay, so tiny.cc/port op will get you access to all the rest of the slides. There's a whole nother evening's worth of slides there in this particular slideshow. So I'm going to go ahead and stop and take any questions that we might have. Barry mentions that NASA thinks that 3 is 2 and 2 is 1 and 1 is none. So that's true also. Be aware that if you are using sine wave inverters, make sure they're safe and they work properly. Go ahead and raise your hand if you have any questions out in the audience.
Someone picked up on slide 6, you have a typo.
Slide 6, slide 6, boy, that was a long time ago.
Mhm.
There's only 115 slides in this slideshow.
Yep.
Yeah,
I think I know where it's at.
tactical.
Yes,
not tactile.
I know. I when I was reading that, it didn't sound right. I saw that error when I was trying to read the word and it didn't match. There we go. Thank you. My slideshows are always in flux. That's why I always use these links where you can get to the slideshow with a link that allows me to always update it, so you always have the most recent version of it.
And Gary made an interesting comment about when using a portable radio, you need to make sure that you have an actual coax connector on the radio, like an SMA, because some, with a tiger tail anyway, because some like Motorola HTs have a solid stud. And if you connect to that, you're going to be on the active connection.
Correct. And in that case, what you might do is look for a point where you can ground it on the body of the radio.
Mhm.
Other questions, please go ahead and raise your hand. I'm sorry this wasn't what you were expecting tonight, but when Dan calls,
Blame it on Dan.
There's
no
always
questions?
to learn,
Say again, Barry.
always so much to learn.
There is, and it's just a, part of the iceberg on top of the water. They're the peak of it.
I didn't even talk about my whole thing about USB drives and computers. I make sure that I have a USB drive that has all the drivers for the radios I have, all the control software for the radios I have, the manuals for each radio, the full installation programs for whatever software I'm using in the field. In case my laptop would completely die, I can get an up and running laptop from my USB on someone else's laptop.
We had an interesting case down here with interference, and they were trying to figure out where the radio interference was coming, and they were sniffing around all the poles and everything, and one person went into the guy's house with a sniffer and found out that the computer was the source of the noise.
It is quite often.
And a lot of these older computers, some of the newer ones too, are not properly grounded, they're not properly shielded, and they can wipe out your HF radio or even your VHF radio with all of the noise. So
the other tip I want to give, and I won't go through all the slides, but I'll just mention this. Whenever I'm packing for a field operation, I set up my portable table that I'm going to take with me, and I put it away from my shack in another part of the house, even if it's just on the other side of the room. I then set up my complete field station, including the computer. If possible, I had the antenna, but sometimes it's not possible with the same antenna I'm going to use. But the feed line, I connect everything. I make contacts with it. I experiment logging, using the logging software, etc. When I'm done and everything is working satisfactory, then I pack everything without moving it from that spot. It never goes back to the shack. So the whole idea is that will catch the problems with the computer, that'll catch the lost the forgotten cables, the interface cables, the microphone, et cetera, et cetera. So I need to be able to fully make contacts before I pack. So, and then I don't go back to the shack because that means I would accidentally leave something there.
Okay, this is a really good presentation, and for a last minute jump in there, really appreciate you, Anthony. You saved us again.
Oh,
Are
no
there any
problem.
comments out there? Suggestions, answers?
I don't know if I'm coming through or not. I have my mic under my table.
Okay,
You're
Mike.
fine, Gary.
Yes, you got your mic working.
I have a couple of quick comments. Number one, in business, I had to pack and unpack sometimes several times a day. And I did that for like 45 years. You know, we all take a lot of time and we pack and make sure that everything is in good shape going, but I didn't hear anything about demobilizing. I have found that people tend to be a great deal more lax when they tear down than when they put up. And I find that if I don't or haven't stayed in control of the packing, a lot of stuff either disappears or gets packed poorly and ends up scratched, broken, disappeared, or whatever. So I would spend as much time repacking as I did packing in the first place.
I agree. The one exception to that was I had to pack everything up at 9 o'clock at night one night. My wife got very ill and we had to leave the field day site and take her away. But the problem was after I did that, throwing everything in there, it took me months to get everything back to where it was ready to go again. And if you don't pack up the same way as if you don't repack the same way you packed the first time, you definitely risk the chance of losing important pieces of your equipment. So that's very good advice, Gary.
Well, the other thing that I recommend is that in what I do in the case of the radios, and I noticed you talked about the manuals and everything. I take all the accessories and put them in a good plastic bag, and then I stick all the pieces in one bigger plastic bag together, and along with the manual, power cord, microphone. I know when I get to the other end, I have everything that I need to make it work.
Let me talk real quick about what I do with manuals, because I never bring an actual manual with me, paper wise. I make a quick guide that I have in the top of my box. So if you let me bring up the picture again real quick here. I actually have a quick start guide in the box, but then I always make sure that I have the manual in PDF format, because I find out when I'm in the field and I'm using my computer to do logging stuff like that, the fastest way for me to find the problem in the manual is to be able to search the PDF. So I make short, quick start guides in either in a notebook or in the top here. We'll show this slide here of my device so that I have the quick things I need, but I don't ever use the paper manual beyond that. I have this quick start guide here, but then I love to have the PDF that I can search through, because then when I'm looking for some obscure setting, I don't have to sit there and search through the manual at the last minute. I can simply use the Control F, type in the word I'm looking for, and it usually lets me find the area of the manual I need real quick.
I don't disagree with that. In fact, I noticed that when you went through that slide the first time. But I have both. I have a PDF of everything in my computer, and on 2 or 3 different memory sticks. But I'll tell you what, I just absolutely like paper.
Yeah, see, I absolutely hate paper. Paper to me is the worst tool in the world, because I can't sort it. I can't search it. I can't read it. in the dark. I can't do any of those things. So I always make sure that I have a PDF of everything.
I might add, if you got a camera and you're coming on, please turn your camera on. This is a video, and it helps a lot to have your camera turned
It
on.
really helps for the presenters, by the way, if we can see your video, because then it really gives us feedback, at least for me. I'm not sure that it's the case with everyone. This is another little case I'm going to show you real quick. This is if you're into QRP, like I am, and you have any of the QRP radios, this won't switch over. Why won't it switch? And you saw my presentation with the Plano box. This particular box is similar, but it's a lot less expensive and it's a little bit bigger. This will work with the 705, the ICOM 705, any of the Zygu side mounted radios. This is a perfect format. What you do is you drill a hole in the side, and then your antenna comes out of the side. You mount the radio either from the bottom or the back or the side. And the nice bonus is you get all these extra boxes to use for other projects. And I have room so I can actually slide one in above my radio. I then put my battery and all the accessories in the top here. I have a hole cut in the back so that it feeds out the line for my interface cable, USB cable to the computer and all that stuff. And then I just push it back in there when I'm done. And I have a cardboard box that this fits in, and then it fits in a carry bag. So this has worked out very well over the years for me.
With all that in mind, I'm going to say 73s, everyone. See you next week. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. And if you do, don't get caught.
73.